The Chaser Report is recorded on Gadigal land.
Striving for mediocrity in a world of excellence. This is the Chaser Report.
Hello and welcome to the Chaser Report with Dom and Charles. And today we're going to look at a book that's just come out that's based on a 40-year study of primates. It's come to the fairly chilling but fantastic conclusion that nothing you've ever done or said wrong is actually your fault, and that nothing you ever do and say wrong into the future will ever be your fault because humans lack the capacity for free will. We're all just chemical bodies walking around and being influenced by stuff that's totally outside our ability to control anything. It's a fascinating theory, and Dom's been looking into it. And so, Dom, what does the author actually say?
After 40 years of study, Robert Sapolsky has concluded that virtually all human behaviour is completely beyond our control. And as beyond our control, as for instance, the convulsions people experience during a seizure where their bodies writhe around, the division of cells or the beating of our hearts. It's completely automatic. So all of our behaviours are just predetermined. There's nothing we can do to stop ourselves.
And is the argument that they're predetermined because of the preceding stuff that's happened to us? Like, it's essentially we are the sum of our inputs rather than having free will over any given moment.
Spoken like someone who understands this a bit because we did an episode about it a bit earlier on. So it's not saying that, everything that happens in life, that there is no such thing as a choice.
So it's not like that Newtonian idea that if we could understand where every atom is, then suddenly you'd understand how the rest of the universe is going to play out.
Yeah, it's not saying that basically everything is predetermined and we're just basically following a script that we can't see. What it's saying is that we make the decisions that we make and act in the way that we act because we are the sum total of various experiences, of our biology, of our upbringing, of all these sorts of things. And so there's no such thing as free will because in any situation, we will always do the same thing. So in a sense, it's just saying that we are the people who we are, so we always do the things that we were going to do.
Dom, can I just say, as a product of years and years and years of therapy about all my mistakes and all the patterns of behaviour that I've exhibited that has led me to this nadir that we call the existence of me.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the nadir we call this podcast.
My therapy has taught me that the one thing that we can do is become aware of the patterns that we exhibit because, we largely bumble through life being this sort of product of our past experience.
Yeah.
And instead interrupt that by becoming aware of it and then actively changing those behaviours by engaging the frontal lobes of our brain, the neocortex, and sort of going, hang on, I am aware that I'm about to do this really stupid thing, and instead I won't publish Bad Parenting, the book.
But you did. Was that already a bad decision?
All right.
Available now from chasershop.com. Not that apparently people are buying it from there.
Actually, it's doing quite well. No, but that was against my better judgment that it's doing quite well.
But Charles, you see, if you follow the argument through, and this is where it starts to get confusing, you were always, it's not as though you're the worst of all possible Charleses. There is only one possible Charles, and that possible Charles was always going to go and fuck his life up to the point where he needed therapy and get therapy and listen to the therapist and thereby somewhat change your behaviour. So
this sounds a little bit like a circular argument, Dom.
It does a little bit. It was always going to be. This scientist is known for circular arguments. No, but let me just sort of try and explain it in a bit more detail. So there's a couple of examples. This is an article from the LA Times, but he's written a new book about all of this. And this guy's a level of scientist where he got one of those MacArthur Genius Grants, right? Like Robert M. Sapolsky.
Is that a sarcastic genius grant?
It's one of the, well, he was always going to get it. You see, he didn't have a choice. But no, it's one of those ones where they give you $1 million a year to do whatever you want, like
Lin-Manuel
Miranda got them and stuff.
Yep.
So this book's called Determined Science of Life Without Free Will. And so basically what he's saying is there's a couple of things. The first is that it really puts criminal law into a degree of perspective. Now, when I studied criminal law years ago, they were trying just a little bit to say that we need to understand that people who commit crimes in some circumstances, that's the result of their upbringing. For instance, people who perpetuate a cycle of abuse when they were abused as a child and they abuse as adults. And that's not to say that they need to be exonerated or that they're innocent or whatever. It's just to say that we need to understand that criminality has complex causes. But he takes this a whole lot further and basically says that basically anything that we do is that same result of our upbringing, our history and all this kind of stuff. And so therefore we don't necessarily have a choice. The choice is illusory because if you think of it, we're a machine programmed to do certain things. And so we're going to do those certain things.
But then how come, two kids can be brought up in the same broken home? One goes off to be a deadbeat and the other one goes off to be hugely successful like me.
Well, maybe one of them has, shall we call them Verity Firth genes, and the other one has Charles Firth genes. But no, these are complicated questions.
Oh, I see. So there's an answer to every question though, because it's like, well, the reason is that those two people were different enough given the same inputs.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, right, okay.
But I mean, the whole thing is it comes down to there is a choice. It's a real choice. It's not as though you don't have a genuine choice. It's just that you'll tend to make the same choice in the same circumstances. There's another example that I want to give where he says, you can imagine a group of 5 or 6 friends going to watch an inspiring documentary. Let's say back in the 90s they went to see Al Gore's
But I thought you said
doco.
an inspiring
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's say they went and seen an inspiring doco about saving rainforest or something, right?
Yeah.
So one person sees that and decides to change their life and become an environmentalist.
Yeah.
Another person decides to become a filmmaker because they thought the images were so incredible. Another one decides to re-enroll in university and become an academic or something.
And the last two decide to become loggers.
That's right, to make some money.
Yeah.
And then the final one, Charles, is you, and you really regret not going to see Dumb and Dumber, your favourite movie. But the point that it's making is, yes, that movie was the catalyst, but what it inspired the people to do were the things they were possibly likely to do or tending to do or at some point going to do anyway.
This feels like not much of a statement about anything. It's basically saying, well, things will pan out the way that they pan out.
Yes.
You know,
so, it does have a degree of MacArthur genius grand truism about it, doesn't it? Things, the shit that will happen is the shit that happened. The thing is, it's to do with perception because a lot of our society is structured around the notion that we do have free will.
Yes.
That we do have genuine choices and that therefore the success or failure of those choices and what they do, that's something that we should feel guilty about or proud about. And it even comes back to the way that our society functions in terms of money, right? Because people who have an awful lot of money, the idea is that they worked harder or that they were smarter or they did something better, therefore they deserve it. Whereas if the point is that we don't and that it's actually a random lottery of circumstances and genetics, and therefore the people who are total fuck-ups didn't really have an option.
I've noticed that most billionaires seem to also be cocks.
Well, maybe that's part of it. Maybe there's a billionaire gene that we'll find someday that makes you an absolute cock.
Yes. And then you suddenly just become very acquisitive of money over all else.
I mean, being a sociopath helps, doesn't it?
Yes.
With being a billionaire.
Yes.
But this has amazing implications for instance,
for criminal law.
Which we'll get to after this.
The Chaser Report. Now with extra whispers.
So the thing is, Dom, I can just go and commit a crime.
Yes.
And then front up with this book that he's just published.
Or just this podcast episode, because you're not going to read the whole book.
No, I'm not going to read the whole book. Or just download the audio book for the judge to listen to, probably the best way, and then go, well, hang on, I'm not responsible for committing this heinous crime because I'm the product of my genetics and upbringing.
And you can call Robert M. Sapolsky as an attorney for the defence. It goes even more complicated. If you think of a brain as a machine, all that we do is basically the product of our brains, which are essentially machines made of neurons in a way. If you think about it, the neuron is going to react the same way to the same stimulus, the same circumstance. That's the point that he's making, is that we're basically, if you think of all the different factors and experiences and genetics that have produced our brains, those brains are going to produce the same outcome in the same circumstances with the same set of facts. And so
But the whole point of therapy is to break patterns, is to respond to the same set of circumstances differently. Like, I've spent so much money being taught that's the, you know what I mean? A lot
of people, maybe you have the neuroplasticity to do that.
You can break patterns,
but some people don't. But some people don't go to therapy. But there are lots of people who just never go to therapy and never improve and never break these patterns.
But this argument is basically saying that therapy can't have any impact, doesn't it?
This was much funnier last time when we talked about Donald Trump.
Well, I've done more thinking about it. I get a bit angry about this theory.
We also brought in Sam Dastiari, which was very entertaining, and Charles' tendency to go and have yum cha with him and then injure himself hideously. And the point being, you're always going to do that.
Yes, that's true.
And in the same manner, when Sam Dastyari, let's just say, made some questionable decisions to do with money,
He was always going to do that.
and he was always going to arguably peddle
Yes.
influence. He was always going to not
Yes.
realise that there were hidden microphones in the garden when he turned off the phone and removed the battery. He was going to get recorded anyway. And therefore, should he be held responsible? This is the thing.
So in actual fact, the more malice and forethought that somebody exhibits during the
Yes.
prosecution of a crime shows the more out of control they were, and it wasn't actually to do with them.
The analogy here is that it's like being drunk, like being a drunk driver. We generally give people a somewhat lesser sentence if they're under the influence or something.
Really?
To
I don't think
degree.
that's true. We hold them more culpable,
Well,
because they're committing an extra crime.
I can't remember. I studied this many years ago. Unfortunately, I never needed to know.
But if you ever get done for drink driving, get Dom as
that's
your
right.
lawyer.
No, but the point. Okay, let's give a better example. So let's say you're having medication for some sort of
Valium.
Let's say, or you're taking
Yeah.
steroids for something which makes you more aggressive. or
Oh,
something.
yes.
And you didn't have any choice. You had to take them. Maybe you took them while you're unconscious in emergency.
Or because you want bigger guns.
Yes, that's right. And so what you do is not really your fault. And the point he's making is that all these experiences are similarly the determinant of what we do.
Because what are we but a bunch of chemicals flowing around a body?
So when you lock up a murderer,
Hmm.
you're punishing someone for having the kind of brain that means that they're a murderer.
So does
which
so-
I can kind of go either way. Like, either it's not their fault and you should let them out because that's just mean. Like, it's not their fault they're a murderer.
Yes.
Or, my God, they're a murderer. Lock them up so they don't murder more people.
It does sort of trample on, I would say, at least several thousand years of the tradition of individual responsibility.
Yes, that's dead. No, we don't need to have that anymore. That's
Right,
great.
okay.
Which is very
And-
liberating.
So it's a bit of a get out of jail free card.
Absolutely.
For criminals. Like, so does this overturn criminal law?
I would think so. I
okay.
think criminal law is finished, which means, Charles, that if we tease out the implication to this, this is fantastic news for Ben Robert Smith. And I'm surprised.
Oh.
I think when he appeals this case, we're going to see these sorts of arguments.
Oh, yes.
Because previously the argument was, no, I'm not a homicidal maniac who killed civilians. Whereas now he could say, yes, I'm a war criminal, but I was always going to be a war criminal. And the unique circumstances of my upbringing made me this war criminal, made me a murderer.
Yes.
And I can't do anything about it.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Sapolsky.
So you just front up to the War Crimes Tribunal in Geneva.
Yeah.
And go,
you say,
uh-uh.
my bad, war crimey, gonna war crime. Well, that's what it is, isn't it?
Yes. So this is a terribly depressing theory, Dom.
But no, but isn't it liberating in a way? Because it just means that if you, like me, have been berating yourself for not being a better version of yourself, a fitter, more
see.
successful version of
Yes.
yourself.
Okay.
If you just think to yourself, well, why don't I get up at 6 a.m. and go to the gym every morning, which is,
And because you're the product of being Dom.
I was never
Yes.
going to. There's no version of me where that's possible.
I see. This is why you've got an extra spring in your step today.
Yeah.
Because
It's not my fault.
You've been liberated from your own.
For myself. Yes, that's right. It's in fact, I now see all of my failings as a particular burden that I'm unfortunate enough to carry, rather than as my fault.
You were always going to be the failure that you are.
Yeah, that's right. I was
Yes.
always going to be a disaster.
And so it's liberating in the same way that Nietzsche is liberating.
Sure.
Like life doesn't mean anything, so
That's right.
therefore you might as well just be happy anyway because nothing matters.
And it doesn't mean stop trying. It just means try exactly the same amount as you were always going to try. Because what's the point if you can't change it?
I want to see a whole lot of self-help books spring up out of the back of this book.
Yeah, I'm thinking of writing
Because-
one called Meh Whatevs.
Yeah, whatevs. Be the you that is already you.
Yeah. Be the you that you already are.
Yeah, the no-step diet plan.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it's interesting because when you look at someone like Donald Trump, who's currently on multiple criminal trials, right? Like, there's all this question of causation and what did he know?
Yes.
And I absolutely believe that it was inevitable from the moment Donald Trump ran for president that he would probably win, but that also that once he became president, it was absolutely inevitable, given him, and this does make sense,
Yes.
given the extent of his narcissism,
Yes.
that he was always going to mount a coup that killed people.
I mean, this theory does allow for absolute 20/20 hindsight.
Yes, doesn't it?
Because it's like, well, everything that happened was always going to happen.
And this is the thing that happens with the whole debate that's raged for millennia about free will versus determinism, is that you can't know the answer. There's no, in science, you're supposed to compare two different cases. You're supposed to...
Yes, but you can't.
You have the control. There's no control. There's no other universe unless Marvel's onto something with that multiverse.
Yeah, you can't test for, well, would he have done this or that? Because the answer is, well, he did whatever he was going to do.
There isn't a universe where Ben Robert Smith wasn't a war criminal and a murderer. According to the judge, I'm not defaming him.
Yeah, as far as we know.
At the point of recording this podcast, that's the current judicial position. So there you go. What does this all lead us to? What it leads me to, Charles, is that if we wonder why do we do this podcast every single day, the answer is we were always
going to.
And that we can't stop it if we wanted to.
Ever.
Unless something happens that was always going to make us stop it. So whichever thing we end up doing, it's okay.
And I think that is why everyone listening should now immediately subscribe to the special premium edition of the Chaser Report.
Yes, $4.
Yes, because you're always going to.
That's right. Don't put it off any longer at Apple Podcasts or at Acast Plus.
Yeah.
Did you know, Charles, there are 2 people who've signed up to the absurdly overpriced subscription? This is the one that's $20
$20. What do you get?
Nothing extra. It was very clear that there's no bonus. I think it's the pity payment.
Thanks, Mum.
Thanks to those 2 people. I've got their email addresses, actually.
We should send out a regular email just to them.
Just to those 2 people. We actually should. We should personally
send,
although maybe they'll unsubscribe.
Unsubscribe. So do we get the email lists of people who subscribe?
Via Acast. If you don't want us to have your email, Apple's your friend for that. We can't get those ones.
Good, no, because I was going to say, we should definitely do a premium email thing. That would be fun.
You should give them a discount to War on 2020.
Yeah.
Email them all.
Okay, yeah. Warren2023.com to buy tickets. But if you're a subscriber, how do you do it?
You have to send them an email. If you read it out here, give them a discount code anyway if you want to.
Oh, yeah, POVO.
Is it?
Yeah. We've got, but it's secret. Don't tell anyone else. Well, no, I suppose you can tell people. We want to sell more tickets, especially to places like all the shitholes we're not selling very, very well in. So it's like Bathurst.
You've got Gabby Bolt on the show and you can't sell in Bathurst?
I know. Well, I think that, I don't know what. Well, because I think they're shitheads. I think that's why she's left Bathurst.
Oh.
Right? And then Cairns.
Are you doing a show in Cairns?
Central Coast, Gosford, which normally sells out, but we're just a little bit soft on sales this year.
It's just a slight issue of a cost of living crisis, Charles.
Yeah, anyway, so that's why we've got this discount code called POVO, POVO, and you get a 20% discount.
The other thing we'd like you to do, if you'd be so kind, is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. And there have been some very funny and insulting ones that we'll read out a little bit later on a different episode. But everyone puts 5 stars, so you can be as mean as you like as long as you put 5 stars, because then we'll know. Actually, then the great thing is about the ones that are really mean with 5 stars is that we don't know whether they're a joke or not. They might be a joke, or they might just be, well, because I'm giving them 5 stars, I can say what I really think.
Yes, I sort of suspect, especially there's one at the moment where it's like, no, he just really hates us, but he gave us 5 stars. By the way, that should be our episode for tomorrow. We should go through some of the...
We should go through some of those, yeah. So look, maybe you can get yours in if you leave it now at Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, but you were always going to anyway. So why should we thank people if they're always going to listen?
Our gear is from Rode, and we're part of the Iconoclast Network.
Catch you next time, if that's what's willed.
I think it's dumb. It's just not even signed. How does he get it peer reviewed?
It took him 40 years to write this book.
Yeah, well, he was always going to take 40 years. But how did he get it peer reviewed? It's unfalsifiable.
That's the great thing about writing a book rather than a scientific paper.